but how do I reach out to a founder? Right? Am I sending them a tweet? Am I LinkedIn messaging them? Like, where do I find them? When you got started, what was working for you? What did you learn about just approaching a founder?
It's such a good question, especially because I feel like there's, venture is a big industry now and founders are getting tons of inbound every day.
Hey, everyone. We have a real treat for you. This time today, we have two people that we absolutely adore and are genuine friends. And maybe most importantly, I'm very fortunate to work with. They work with me at Andreessen Horowitz. And the reason we have them today is because we wanted to do an episode on a question that we get asked all the time. I get asked all the time.
You get asked
I get asked all the time, but Aarthi too, which is, how do I become a venture capitalist, right? These folks, I see them tweet a lot. A lot of VCs tweet a lot. I see them online. I see them doing podcasts. There seems to be.
What do you guys do?
There's a lot of tweeting and podcasting. But what's the job? How do I even get in? Do I need money? What are some of the basics? What do VCs even do when they're not on Twitter? Do VCs even exist outside of Twitter? But anyway, we get all these questions. So I thought I'll get two people who I think are amazing at the job of being venture capitalists. They have very, very different paths and stories of how they got there. And, I just kind of adore working with them. I've, had the privilege of working with over the last year and a half. So we have Olivia Moore and Brian Kim. Olivia, Brian, welcome.
Hey, thank you. It's great to be here.
Oh my goodness, yes. By the way, feel free during this episode to tell everybody how much you love working with me.
We love you. Yeah, this is great. I was just going to say we love you too.
Wink.
Of course we do.
If you have to ask.
I always have to ask. I always like to ask. You have to put it out there, right? But no, seriously, I do generally adore working with both of you. I think you're both fantastic in your own way. But what I really, maybe this is a good place to start, which is what I really like about each of you, and I would love to maybe start with you, Olivia, is you have very different paths of how you got into venture. So maybe, you want to tell us a little bit about your story and, how do you get this job?
I feel like everyone's path to venture is very unique to them and different, and always some fun stories. I was aware of venture from a really young age. I grew up in a tiny town in Oregon, but my mom, before she retired, had been a venture capitalist out in Chicago. This was like pre-software. So I'll tell her this business has 90% gross margins. And she'll be like, no way, that's not possible. She was looking at Starbucks and Chipotle and businesses like that. So I was aware of it for a while. She was doing angel investing. Then I went to Stanford for undergrad, and startups are everywhere there. It's impossible to avoid them. I started working actually for the student government, which has this massive endowment, and that's where StartX, which is an incubator, had spun out of. And so I ended up starting my own incubator for student founders to kind of get a sense of what would it actually be like if I was going to take a real shot at doing a startup? Should I give up my McKinsey offer and spend my summer trying to build this thing instead? And so from there, it was kind of a natural path, which we can talk about, but it gave me kind of an excuse to talk to VCs because I had information about Stanford student startups, which they were really excited about. And eventually ended up working at a firm called CRV and then joined A16Z about 2 years ago.
And Olivia is amazing. And if you haven't, by the way, I think both of you are amazing. But Olivia has amazing social media and Twitter game, which we'll get to.
Olivia's tweets, they're just really great. If you're interested in consumer tech, marketplaces, app store stuff, she's the person to go talk to. She's awesome.
Yeah. By the way, I really like your Elizabeth Holmes voice today.
So sorry.
It's quite the Theranos vibe here.
It works. Let's just keep the eyes wide open as well.
Oh, man.
I'm definitely going to.
It is 20% better than this morning, which says a lot. It was really, really bad.
Yeah.
So.
I'm gonna pay for the Elizabeth Holmes comment. Or Liz Holmes, as the New York Times called her.
Liz Holmes.
But okay, Brian, BK, your story, because your story is actually closer to my story as how to we got into venture. So how did you wind up here?
Yeah, that's a great question. As Olivia was talking, I was sort of reflecting, and it's interesting. The knowing venture from an early age, sort of the Stanford, which is sort of the, hotbed of all the venture as well as activity for a long time, is quite the opposite. I like to probably think I'm quite out of what we would call central casting. I'm not an obvious candidate for...
I think he just called himself handsome right here.
No, well, okay.
Okay, sure. Moving along.
not on the central casting in a way that, look, like my last real sort of role that actually probably earned a right to even be in this job is having worked at a tech company or two tech companies, but probably mainly Snapchat. And as we all know, that's sort of based in LA. It's not even close to Silicon Valley. And before that, we all don't like to talk about it, especially me, but I used to be a banker for 9 years, which is probably 8 years and 11 months too long, but that's what I did. And so not an obvious candidate, honestly, thinking through like VC. But what was interesting is, after having been at Snap for so long and working with just brilliant founders and brilliant people who just at the forefront of changing consumer behaviors, I drank the Kool-Aid in a lot of it, and just got very, very excited about sort of the space. And even when I was doing investment banking, I worked almost exclusively with sort of the internet type companies. And when I met, really Joe Tsai and Jack Ma at Alibaba for the first time, it was like eye-opening. Oh my God, these people think so differently. They're like aliens. They're like, oh, we're going to build these companies for 100+ years. And it was just a very fundamentally different mindset. And I couldn't wait to work for people like that. My journey was I begged my way. I genuinely begged my way into Snapchat for any job. I begged, please let me do anything. They did not know what to do with me, so they put me in a thing called strategy. And I think that's been like a blessing, because it gave me sort of the burst to kind of figure out what I could do within a startup that was growing something like 30x in overall employees and going from zero revenue to many billions, as Sriram has greatly contributed. So that was like a really interesting journey. And after having come out of that, the idea was, it's like sort of an inception. A seed has taken hold. And the seed was like, I want to work with and work for people like this for honestly the rest of my life. This is sort of life-changing for a lot of people. And the products that we work on in the hands of millions and millions of people. And to me personally, there's nothing more exciting than that. And so the way I got into venture essentially is very non-linear, actually, where I did not know anything. And I thought, look, like I have like some understanding of what a good consumer product looks like, feels like, what metric might look good, because I had more of a finance-y, metric-y background. And, with few good friends who were still at Snapchat, 4 to 5 of us, we started this coalition of sorts called Uncommon Projects, which was, we're just sharing deals. We're investing in, a couple of interesting, founders that we meet, and a lot of projects that we like. And I realized as I was sort of working at a next startup that's called Bungalow, which is doing more of a marketplace thing, I realized that 90% of my joy in a day was coming from that 10% of time I was putting into odd hours, like 7 a.m. calls as founders, 11 p.m. calls as founders. And I was getting really animated and sort of, came to a decision where this should probably be my full-time job. And so, that's sort of taken hold. And luckily, I knew a person or two at Andreessen Horowitz who had reached out and said, hey, like we might, be interested in looking for people who understand one or two things about consumer products. Like, would you be interested? And that's how the story started. And that was pre-COVID. And I think my interview period was 9 months. I think my references, they did 15 people reference. So I thought I was running for a political office. But ultimately through the gauntlet, I gained admission, if you will. And I've been an incredible journey for the last 2.5 years.
Wow. And both of you are incredible. I think one thing I like about both your stories is they're so different. I think Brian said something which is like, it's non-linear. In some way, I think there's no obvious path to get a role at a venture capital firm, which may be a good segue to, I think, the heart of what we wanted to get to. And maybe this kind of allowed for anybody to kind of jump in, which is for people listening, and they may be, they may be in Silicon Valley, maybe they're a PM, maybe they're an engineer, maybe they're not in Silicon Valley, maybe they're not even in this country. If you had to start with maybe very tangible things about how do you become a VC, where should they even start?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think like this is kind of a common phrase about the job, which is like there's a few key parts, like finding great companies, like picking which ones to invest in, like actually winning the deal, and then like working with companies afterwards. I know Brian says he's not central casting, but in many ways, I feel like lots of people in venture who are successful are not central casting, because, we need people that can help find companies, work with companies after investment, before investment, in different ways. Like if everyone could all have like the same skill set, it would be, a less fun and interesting job, and there's less that we could contribute to our companies. So I guess that's a long precursor to say, I think like everyone who wants to get into venture has something unique that they can bring to the job. For me, and I think for a lot of people who are trying to get into venture young, so I joined a year out of undergrad. I worked at Goldman for a year, and then I went to CRV. And at that point, it's often honestly the finding part, because you have a lot of energy, you have a lot of time, you're high hustle, you can go and meet 40 companies in a week and kind of train your own internal model really quickly to understand what's interesting and what's not to my firm. I think the next level of that, and sometimes where people are really successful in recruiting into venture at even a younger age, is like, do you have a differentiated network or set of resources or access that makes that finding job even better for you or even more calibrated? So that could be a school, that could be a company you worked at, that could be your own Twitter account or a Slack group you founded, or, some other group that you brought together where there's talented people building things that will take 30 minutes out of their day to talk to you.
Well, maybe I think because Olivia is just really so amazing at all parts of it, but especially this. But when you got started, I think people listening to are going to go like, okay, but how do I reach out to a founder, right? Am I sending them a tweet? Am I LinkedIn messaging them? Like, where do I find them? So when you got started, right, like what were you doing? What was working for you? What do you learn about just approaching a founder?
It's such a good question, especially because I feel like there's, venture is a big industry now, and founders are getting tons of inbound every day. And so especially as like, an analyst associate level person, getting a founder to actually respond to your email is not easy necessarily, especially being a consumer investor. Like the least you can do is download the product, spend time on the product, and come up with something interesting, differentiated, helpful to say about it. It is really the least you can do, but you would be shocked how few people actually do it. So if you're reaching out to a founder and you even include a couple lines about how you found the product, what you think is unique about it, like a question you have about where it might be headed, like those kinds of things, it sounds very simple, but it can be like a major difference.
I can vouch for that. We have a founder that Olivia and I worked on together, and we got a great chance to work with her. Verbatim. Like, I would not have responded to you all unless Olivia had first reached out. And it was so genuine. It was interested in the product and actually made it clear that she used and had thoughts. And that, it's like Olivia said, like, it sounds easy, but, when you go through hundreds or more in a week, it's just easy to become like a rot motion, which, that care and genuine interest actually, I think, does show, especially the founders whose product is their life.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of had that as a founder myself. Like, for 2 companies, we'd have these investors reach out, and about like 70% of them would be like, really heard great things about you and your company, would love to chat. And you're like, okay, you'd like schedule this meeting. First, they'll be like, would love to chat. And then you're like, great, do you have time? They'll be like, oh, looping in my admin. I'm like, but you said you wanted to chat. Like, what? Okay. So you'd like schedule this whole thing like 3 weeks out. And then at the office, I'm like, so what do you do? Like, why are we meeting? And I'm like, oh, I thought, okay, I guess this is like totally off cadence. So you're totally right that the number of people who just like even install what you have, like try it out or look at the website, the homepage, and even be like, this is what you do. Even that would be like, wow, they've done some research. There were very few of them who would be like, actually test out the whole experience. Look at the team. Talk to us about like, I saw that you don't have a marketing person. Do you need a marketing person? I know this really good candidate. And you're like, holy shit, they actually went through this second level on our website. This is amazing. So it's like the bar is so low. Most people don't even cross that threshold.
Yeah. Sure. You asked something really interesting, like how do you become a VC? And I get this question sometimes, and it's, the non-linearity continues. I think we would find that the backgrounds are varied. Some have been previous founders and succeeded, exited, and knew how to build a company, or maybe not. Right? Like some have tried to build a company and didn't quite work, and understands the ins and outs, the ups and downs of that journey. I think there are a group of people who were operators, like you and me, to some extent, who who've seen, how the thing gets made.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How the pie gets baked from the very early on of like, like at a village stage or family stage, how that becomes a village, a city, a country, and number of people and complexity of the organization. And that also gives you like a slightly different view of how to understand the company building aspect of it. And then you also have the investor track, which actually gives you incredible amount of leverage because your acumen or instincts have been honed by seeing so many. And I think that's a really interesting point to me, where there is no single route, but I do think what is interesting in all three is what I would say the activeness, right? If you just joined a company and just worked as like a foot soldier in something, like that's fine, and maybe you do it, but really I think the value is being at the forefront. What I call is like the best job to have at a startup is to either own a full P&L or being in an extremely fireable position, because that means you're either doing something of importance, and if it works, you're great, you're a hero, and if it doesn't work, you're fine. And I think that's a good position to be. And same with founder, like if you just sort of like a lifestyle type business, that may not be the type of founders that are well suited for VC, and likewise for investors. So I think that activeness is a sort of an ingredient that I tend to think about. And Olivia touched on this a little bit, at early stages, especially for listeners or your audience who are slightly, in the earlier side of the career. I know we all think we're really busy, right? But like when you have kids and family responsibilities, life gets hectic sometimes. And I think what's interesting is like earlier stage, you might be very busy, but actually what you have to offer is hustle and time.
Yep.
And if you're smart and if you go about it the right way and use the time wisely, you have a lot of value to add to, especially investors and VCs. And there's nothing better to a VC than, hey, have you heard of this company?
Oh, yes.
And you haven't heard of it, and it's good. Jesus Christ.
Yes.
You repeat that 3 times or 2 times, like 1 is an aberration, 2 is a trend.
Yep.
So then, you're converting this time and hustle into something usable and tangible and extremely, value add for folks in a position that you would want to be. And I think if you go through this like other journey, a path of like founder, operator, investor, what have you, then what you end up gaining is like this knowledge or empathy or sort of expertise in some area that may be helpful, or even, a lens to evaluate some of the opportunities. And I think, you convert early in the time of like time and hustle into going through this journey, and maybe that becomes a little bit of knowledge and expertise, and you utilize that to maybe go get into VC, which is a very idiosyncratic, industry, and seats or spots don't open all the time. And, if it's very possible that nobody needed who understood, social products 2 years ago, and I would be jobless.
Yeah.
There's so much gold in what BK just said. The part about if you stand out by identify something that we haven't heard, somebody hasn't heard of before, you do it a couple of times, you will be on their radar, right? I guarantee you will be discussed on the internal Slack. And this person amazing.
One question I have is, I've met and worked with a bunch of founders, and some founders have this perception of we should only work with VCs who have operating experience. If they don't have operating experience, what do they know about what I'm going through? Have they built a product? Have they shipped anything? And then you have a bunch of founders who are like, well, we don't really need them for operational feedback. That we've got. But we want them to be good at finance. We want them to be good at metrics. What's your take? Do you feel like VCs need to have a particular background or check off a few check boxes, operator versus not? What's your take on that?
It's funny, operating, especially more recently, has been, maybe not a trend, but at least a category of investors that, founders have, started to appreciate, at least because they've sort of gone through some of the journey, as you said. One of the disclaimers that Olivia is sick of hearing is, I'm going to have product thoughts. Please do not listen to me. All I'm doing is I'm planting some seed in the direction. I'm going to say some stupid product thing, but you're the founder. You control the direction. I'm a dumb investor. Do not listen to me. But here's some of the directions. Then, you do what you will. But, ultimately, I think it depends on what the founder wants out of their investor, right? If you're looking for capital, if you feel like you've got it, then, someone who meddles in like, oh, like that should be the product direction. You should go to market this way, that way, like may or may not be helpful.
Yep.
So some founders actually look for folks who are just, mostly capital and will sit out the sort of operational side. But I think what's the overarching theme that I would think about of how should VC think about, folks with operational expertise or not, I think it's like sort of thinking through your strengths and what you might want to, augment to build a generational and long-lasting enduring company. And if you feel like they bring something or the platform they represent brings, expertise and resources and network that you wouldn't otherwise have,
yeah,
I think that's a fine way to think about how you select your investor base.
Yep. I love that.
I totally agree. It feels like a debate that will never quite be resolved. And maybe that's because there's good investors who come from both backgrounds. I do think it does come down to you as a founder, what are you looking for out of the relationship? Maybe it's, I've seen BK get to partner with many companies because he was able to see and be such a huge part of Snapchat's growth, which is an unparalleled advantage for any brand new consumer social company. And then there's other companies where, maybe the most relevant investor is a career VC who was on the board of XYZ, adjacent company or something for 5 or 10 years and kind of saw the journey from zero to IPO. So it does feel very case by case.
Oh yeah, I'm very much on team X social media person big cigarette VCs, but
I wonder why.
Yeah, maybe bias. Olivia, I want to go to you with this one, which is, I think for folks listening to this, some of them will be they look at BK and they're like, great, you've been 10 years plus experience. You were at Snap, a well-known company, and maybe they're much earlier, right? They're earlier in their career, maybe a year or two, or they're still in academia, or maybe they're not in a well-known tech company. We all know people who have been kind of stood out, made a name for themselves, or built a network. So if you are a bit early in your career, or maybe you don't have a brand name on your LinkedIn, how do you build a network? Because I think we talked a little bit about the importance of a network or brand and how you can then, you stand out. But how do you build a network?
I think it does come back to what BK said earlier of there is something you have as a young person that more senior people don't, which is time and hustle. And so I found when I was a student at Stanford, I would send cold emails to hundreds of VCs about this incubator that I was working on. I had no idea what I was doing, but I had one thing to offer, which is, hey, I'm starting this thing. I will send you a list of all of the Stanford startups that I find through doing this, and I will tell you who's fundraising and who all the teams are. Will you please come and spend, 30 minutes to talk with the cohort of founders about this? And you can do the same for startups. I was looking to intern at many startups, and a lot of them, maybe if you're a student, again, are looking to break into campus distribution or looking to hire ambassadors or looking to understand Gen Z or another audience. And I guess my advice kind of comes down to if you are maybe specific in how you think you can be helpful, and if you come very prepared, it goes so far in kind of impressing even really, really impressive people and getting them to give you 20, 30, 40 minutes of their time. And then follow-up is another huge thing I would say in the networking game, especially for young people. I have so many calls with amazing students, amazing young career people. And then, there's no real specific ask or anything, and I just never hear from them again. And so even saying hey, I took this internship, or hey, I have this other thing I thought you want to know about every 3, 6, 9 months, I think is such a good idea.
Olivia, so many gems right there. Because I did the whole series about how to write a cold email, and I would talk about how most people, so many of us have that first coffee, first meeting, then you never hear from them again. And I'm just send them an email about what are you up to. It could be you don't need to grab another coffee, right? You can just be well, I'm up to this, or I read this interesting piece, and just staying on top of mind is so powerful. The other thing I want to point out is what Olivia said. Obviously, you've gone so far in your career, you work at, a very well-known firm, but even as a student, right? Writing a thoughtful email, and if you're a VC, just getting a thoughtful email puts you ahead of so many people trying to, reach you. And then saying, hey, go meet some smart people that you may not have met before. I'm going to help curate and aggregate and give you that's great, right? Like, and if you do that once or twice, you're going to be ahead of 99% of the people. So what Olivia did, even back when she was a student, is ahead of what most people would do, right? And I think there's something profound, which is like everyone has something to offer. It could be insight, it could be a network, but if you're in tech, if you're not in tech, if you spend time and energy and just sending a thoughtful email and doing it repeatedly is going to get you so far.
She also said something interesting where, like, how do you build a network and you sort of do these thoughtful, thoughtful outreach. There's another sort of, and I think, Sriram, you might have actually coined this, but like, it's like a really permissionless way of doing something where, you could write about something that you're very excited about. And maybe you don't have all the requisite knowledge. Maybe you do. But in the world of technology where we live, things change. What now? Like, especially with AI these days, like an hourly basis.
Yeah.
And so if you have time, you can read up and form an opinion and write something about it. And I think we even at our firm hired people that we found through writing thoughtful essays around an area that they're really interested in. And if that happens to coincide with what we are interested in, that's actually a network, because network doesn't have to mean the person you grabbed coffee, you had Zoom. It could be strongly shared opinion about a topic.
Oh, yeah.
And, I think that's like another way to maybe, quote unquote, build a network and get yourself known a little bit in the space that you're interested in.
Well, I'll point out, and Olivia probably won't mind me saying this, like even way before we met, way before, she was getting interviewed, or we kind of talking about her working at the firm, right? The newsletter that you run with Justine was kind of the first time, and those things would get shared all the time because it was thoughtful, it was great. And over time, we're like, hey, who are these folks who write this amazing newsletter? And they seem to a vibrant community. And, that led to conversations. Let's go to a fun question. What does a VC do all day? What is the job exactly, right? And what are different kinds of ways to do the job? But what does a venture capitalist do?
Every day is so different, which I know is like the worst kind of cop-out answer. But I would say, like, in general, it's trying to like keep on top of all the ways we can help our portfolio, and then ideally getting ahead of whatever is next. The way that venture works, especially early stage venture, like deals become kind of like a hot deal, like they're raising money, everyone's chasing them so quickly.
Yeah, but when Olivia, you want to explain what you want to explain what you mean by hot deal?
Yeah, definitely.
Oh yeah.
So I would say like there's a couple companies in maybe each category that raise money every year that for some reason they become really, really competitive, and every firm is chasing them and wanting to work with them, and it becomes kind of an all-out war to see who gets to lead the round. Sometimes it's a great team. Sometimes it's a product that has a lot of traction. It can be a real mix of things. But in those cases, like having spent time with that company and with those founders, getting to know them before it's a hot deal can often be the difference between like whether they pick you or not. And ideally, you get to know them well enough and develop your own conviction to the point where it doesn't become a hot deal because you just invest before everyone else figures out about it. That's like the best case scenario, I would say. So most days, for me at least, are meeting at least a couple of new companies to try to kind of figure out what are my maybe top prospects for the quarter or for the next few months of like, what do I think is going to become something really, really interesting that we want to kind of spend real time on.
Yeah, I love that. And Brian, what about you? What do you do all day?
I got to ask this question one day. What do I do all day? So actual, thing that happens, it is actually a lot of Zoom meetings, a lot of discussion internally, externally with founders and folks inside of the firm as well. But to bring it like maybe a level higher is that I tend to think like what our job, VC is interesting. People are like, oh, like you get to invest, like we're founders, and that's all good. Like, yes, that's all true. But at the end of the day, we're stewards of capital, right? Like we have limited partners who give us money to invest in the next promising startup. Our quote unquote duty is to deploy those capital wisely and invest in winners and return hopefully many more folds of money than we receive, and those capital typically goes back to a lot of good things like public funds, like educational funds, like endowments, etc., hospital, foundations, etc. So if I think about that, at the end of the day, like the job is to invest in a company that return capital. Great. But how and what actually happens in a day to day, in my mind, is like we convert to some extent, like our thoughts, I suppose. And our firm has like an interesting way of putting it, which is prepared mind. So, you develop a prepared mind around a space, a company, or whatever, and you convert that into quote unquote a deal. Sit, on the sidelines, and hopefully it does well, and you return capital. That's great too. But I think there are, parts of venture capital more and more so these days that sort of getting awakened to the fact that the outcome isn't just a deal because we want to return capital to, our limited partners. The outcome is to actually help that company become very successful. There's an element of help where what does that look like and what does help mean and what is the end goal? The end goal is essentially the company being like a very enduring success and actually getting to liquidity, which whether it means like M&A outcome or IPO outcome, what have you. And so I tend to think like what we do each day may differ on a daily basis, which is great for people like who have ADD like me. And they vary between like sourcing and reading all these things and meeting all these companies to develop prepared mind to picking the winner. So you got to think about, like why and how and what are the framework that I'll deploy. Winning, which is more of a, firefighting motion sometimes, especially if it's a hot deal, you go into a firefighting mode. But then it extends into working with your company as well, especially if you're sitting on the board, you owe, fiduciary duty to the shareholders of the company. And in order to do that, you need to, exercise what they call duty of care. So that means like your attention and care while you're employed in a VC also needs to go to many of your portfolio companies that you are working very closely with. So I tend to think there are like 4 to 5 different elements of the job. And depending on the day, it sort of, changes all the time. But I would say overall, split wise, I tend to sort of spend maybe it's like, 70-30 or 60-40, depending on a day, where the more the majority goes to, the investing activity and slightly less maybe goes to actively helping or exercising that care for the companies that we work with.
Yeah. But I think
I was just going to add one thing, which is it's such a good point because we put in so much time, energy, and effort to kind of like win the deal and get a chance to work with the company. But that is always just like step one of what ends up being like then a 5, 10, 15 year journey. And Brian and I work on a bunch of companies together that we've been kind of lucky enough to get to invest in. And many of those founders we're talking with literally every day because they, have a question. We're helping interview candidates. We're kind of unlocking some network things for them. And so, I think that's another thing that maybe young people getting into venture, it's important to understand, which it's not just like flying around meeting founders and chasing deals. But the most important part of it is like what actually comes after you actually make the investment.
Great point. One of my favorite examples is this investor of ours, angel investor, first checked into our company. And we were like, well, okay, that was great. We finished closing the round. We got back to work. And he came in one day and he was like, so I'm really good at data science. And what I can help you with is if you can just give me like a big data dump of everything that you have, I'm happy to just figure out all the queries, charts, whatever, and just like make sense of the whole thing. Would that be useful for you? And we were like, you fucking out of your mind. Yeah, that'll be great. And he was like, oh, and I was like, why? Why are you being so nice? Like, what do you need in return? And he was like, just something. Like, I just feel like I can help you with this thing. You guys are like a 3-person shop. I don't feel like, you have the resources to go hire someone or have the bandwidth. But just send me what you have, just a SQL dump, and I'll take care of it. And we were like, this guy is amazing. So to this day, we've kept in touch. It's Leo Polowitz from Susa Ventures.
Amazing.
And he's fantastic.
I mean, that karmic jar, Aarthi, he just filled it up to wazoo. And I think the great thing is our jobs and network and these opportunities are very long dated. So
it was awesome. I was like, you want to give us your time and do this like super boring work? And he's like, yeah, that'd be so fun. And I'm like, okay, sounds good. So since then, I've just like sent him deals, tried to be helpful, and just been like, Leo, just want to check in because I know he's going to be valuable to these companies too.
Leo's going to wake up after the episode comes and be like, why are people sending all these SQL dumps? Like, what am I supposed to do? Did something happen?
Actually be excited.
Yeah, Leo's fantastic. I think something Brian said, and Olivia said, I think super true, is like this. When people ask me, how is it to go from an operator, which is kind of a weird word, like, to a venture capitalist, what really changes? And I think the fact that your day is so different, even between ours, like when you're with a company doing a role, you typically have a good day or bad day. The company is doing well or it's not doing well. Your team is doing well, not doing well. You're building a thing. So you're kind of in the same rhythm, right? But when we see you work in so many different kinds of companies. They are in different stages. They are in, very different kinds of health. So you could wildly swing from, I'm going to convince this person to join this company for me, to talk to a prospective founder to, just figure out what they're working on, to there's a crisis, right? And so, one thing to tell people is like, a key part of the job is your internal, like emotional, like, ability kind of like manage your emotional state.
Yeah.
Because I've definitely had ones where you go from like a very intense situation to being like, hey, you should absolutely join this other company, which is amazing. And you have to so quick and Zoom meetings, whether you kind of like switching out, you have to like be on. And I think sometimes when you're an operator, you're not used to that, like, because you're so used to being in one rhythm. You're very busy with jobs as VCs, but a couple of things I want to get to, and maybe to Olivia.
It's Friday at 5 p.m. Like, what else could you possibly have on your plate?
At A16Z, we work 24/7 for our companies. We do. Okay. All right. So, Olivia, I think we talk about this offline. One of the things I love about Olivia is, she's amazing on Twitter. If you haven't already, go follow her. Maybe let's keep it simple. What is the secret to writing a great tweet thread?
First of all, I think there's probably many more people better qualified to answer this question than me.
Oh, come on. Okay, you're good. Okay, let's just go with that.
It's honestly, I do feel like it's kind of a learned skill in that, like, I used to be incredibly nervous to tweet anything, and I still get pretty nervous sometimes. I think, like, there's a lot of content out there, and so I try, if I'm doing kind of a more serious, like, longer form thing that I'm sharing with founders or with the ecosystem, I try to spend some time to invest into, like, okay, I think this thing is interesting. So a recent example was like, I was like, I'm curious how many apps have been, number one on the App Store in the past year. So then, like, you could tweet that question, which could get interesting responses. But then I was like, okay, I'm actually going to go pull the data. And then I noticed, like, hey, there's some patterns or there's some interesting trends in here that might tell us something about, like, what consumers care about, like this year, last year, the next year, all of those things. And so I would say my tweets that have, like, maybe reached the most compelling founders are typically things where I, like, take a question I have or an insight that I've learned from someone and then go just like a level or two deeper to make it a little bit more actionable, or like do the work for people in some way of like, okay, what should I learn from this? Or how does this like help me in my, day-to-day life for my job?
One of the things I've been nudging Brian about, because Brian's so fantastic, is you've been tweeting too. I like your story. From what have you learned so far about writing great? Because I know one of your recent threads went really, really viral.
Yeah.
I tend to think my area is probably a little different. I could try to build a public persona, etc. But sort of what I decided was, look, like, to Olivia's point, let me do the work for them. Let me actually think about a metadatabase that, like, founders will find very useful, but don't necessarily have access to. And let me mostly only tweet when I have something to share with them as they build their products. Do I have, are these metrics good? Like, I'm not sure. And like, what should I even care about? And a lot of founders sometimes are in this journey of finding that out by, trials and errors. And so my thought process, and I have like one tweet that like did pretty well. And I think the thing that I try to do, and in that, look, like, here's a bunch of data and how we think about what a good, great, okay type metrics are as you build your company. These can serve as some of the benchmark or guiding posts that may be relevant to you. And I've been blown away by and deeply grateful for other founders who reached out and said, this is actually very, very helpful. I was looking for this. And I think that's been my experience, and my objective or goal is to, write and let people know when I have things like that, which are typically a little more medium-term dated. I don't, I think it requires a little bit of data gathering and sort of the fermentation of that a little bit for it to be very useful for company building.
Brian always tends to underplay his own expertise.
Yes.
Like you'll talk to him and he'll be like, yeah, I've kind of like messed around with it. Like I remember joining Clubhouse to do international work. I'd never done anything like that before. And I reach out to Brian. I'm like, hey, super new. You've done this before. You've done growth work before. And Brian pulls out this like spreadsheet and it's got like different markets, ARPU, cell phone penetration, all like color coded. I'm like, what the fuck? Like,
Yeah. Brian has a lot of spreadsheets lying around, I'll tell you that.
I'm like,
I'm a data person a little bit.
I'm like looking at that going, you made it seem like you were just like kind of coasting at Snap. And here's like this whole thing that you just did in your free time. This is not even your job. It's kind of insane. So you should be tweeting a lot more.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know why you hold yourself back. You should just like put everything out there.
Brian can testify. I annoy him about this all the time. Okay. I know we're almost at a last question to each of you. We've been talking about people who want to be a VC. A lot of folks who are listening to this obviously are already founders or thinking of being one or building a company, and they want to reach out to venture capitalists such as yourself. So for people listening to this, what is the best way for them to approach you or people like you?
Honestly, I would say like cold emails still work really well, and good cold emails executed well. There's lots of stories within A16Z, but like we've hired people from good cold emails. We've made great investments from good cold emails. There are managing partners at the firm who still take first meetings themselves from cold emails that are done really well. So I would, email, Twitter, all good channels, LinkedIn, even I need to check my messages there more often, but it's a good channel. I would say as kind of specific as you can be about like what you're building, where you are in the product phase. Are you launched? Can you share a couple metrics? And then like, what are you looking for? Are you wanting a more casual coffee chat? Are you wanting advice on something? Or are you actively fundraising? I am a long email person, but so this is kind of hypocritical for me to say, but if you can keep it even to like 5 or 6 sentences, investors are pretty good at like parsing information, and they'll be able to tell pretty quickly if this is like a potential fit for kind of what they're excited about and what they're doing.
Yeah, no, I would say there's a lot of, content or background on typically all of us out there, whether it's LinkedIn, company profile, what have you. And so, our history are not relatively shrouded in mystery. So they're like, touch points and connection points that you can leverage that to get a warm intro. But also what's interesting is, look, like based on, where we work, the areas that we're interested in, we write a lot, we tweet a lot, we blog a lot. To the extent that there are things that are relevant to that, this type of cold email to execute it well is probably something not like, hey, like I want to get into VC, want to pick your brain, like coffee, ? And it may look something more like, read your blog, this is really interesting, I've been thinking about this a lot, this is a problem statement that interests me, I'm new and I understand this is like maybe not, immediately doable, but love to talk to you. And, sometimes we have, these firefighting things going on. So maybe we're not, but we could be behind emails, etc., where this is where the follow-up comes in. Look, like the first time not responding, we feel bad, but, maybe not as bad. Second time we see that, we don't respond, the guilt level goes up. Third time, holy shit, I gotta respond to this person.
Yeah.
So, the following up thing really works here too.
Both of you, just fantastic advice. I think one thing I'd also add is it's kind of like the amount of time it's going to take to respond. For example, I get so many people who send me these emails. They're like, hey, I'm 22 years old. I would love advice. And I want to be thoughtful, but I'm like, okay, I need to be thoughtful, and I kind of push it off because I don't want to send something pithy. And I often won't wind up answering just because it just keeps getting put up because I'm very thoughtful. But if somebody asks me something very specific, then I can just bang out like a 2-line email, and then we have a conversation going. So I think one of my advice, like Olivia said, is like, the job is to go find amazing founders, right? So, we're always looking for amazing people. That's the job. And if you can just make it easy on the other person, like, who are you? What are you doing? And be very precise. Like, don't ask for like, hey, I ready to chat. You're like, okay, well, there's a lot of people. It's going to be hard, and I don't have time. But if you make it specific, better. But I think both of you just fantastic for Twitter advice. You're going to get a lot of email, a lot of LinkedIn messages and tweets after this. But
Fantastic.
yeah,
Love it.
I love it. I just want to say thank you so much. You
Thank
both
you
are
for your
just
time.
fantastic, and you're both fantastic at Twitter, but also just working in founders. I know so many people who just love working with you, whether they are part of A16Z's portfolio or not. And this was a blast. You should come back. This was so much fun.
Yeah.
We would love that. Aarthi and Sriram, thank you so much for your time
you.
and inviting us here.
Thank you,
This
guys.
is super fun.